Understood.
Okay, we can start, Dan, because you have the honor of the first word and possibly the last word.
Okay.
And the title of the session is A New Era for Global Politics, a New Era for Journalism. So essentially, it's your thoughts on how journalism is changing because the world and politics are said to be changing. So
Yeah.
any
Well, they
thoughts you have
certainly
on
are.
that would be gratefully received.
Okay. Should I just
Yeah, just
start? Do I
start
need to
away.
introduce
Yeah.
myself?
Yeah, yeah.
Who do we have there? Students?
Some students, but I think a mixture of people.
Okay. Well, fine. I'll talk for a little bit. How long do I have?
Well, say 10, even 15 minutes would be fine.
Okay.
And people will ask you questions.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, I'm here for a couple hours if you need me.
Very good.
I have a few notes. Let me just try to answer your question, which of course is a heavy question and a good question. Look, in the book of Ecclesiastes, Allison is quite a theologian, so she might appreciate this mention. It famously says, "What has been will be again, will be again. What has been done will be done again, and there is nothing new under the sun." I've always liked that line. I think many people do. I find it comforting and not at all cynical. The world feels chaotic, but we've been here before. Whatever we're struggling with, others have struggled too, and humanity has weathered many storms. It's kind of nice. That said, the sentiment may clash with today's reality because, fairly obviously, lately it feels like the ground is shifting beneath our feet, technologically, societally, politically, within countries, and diplomatically in world affairs. Continuity feels almost quaint when every system that we know was reinventing itself, or so it seems, in real time. So, our question today, as I understand it, is how these changes in reality interact with the changes in journalism. Those that have happened, those that might yet happen, those that maybe need to happen. Put another way, in a time of global political upheaval, is journalism also entering a new era? And if so, what kind of journalism will survive or even thrive in that era? You know, it's funny, I missed the 2 p.m. session because I was actually meeting at a cafe near the beach, 2 young people from the US who want to be journalists. And, well, one of them comes from a very, very wealthy family, so there's really not much question about why she would take that risk, but the other one did not, and they were dying for some optimism from me. And I guess 20 years ago, when I would have such conversations, I was nothing but optimistic, and today it's very difficult. But I tried to sum it up with me, and you know, as we were speaking, some ideas occurred to me that I'll try to actually add to my notes here today. So look, let's start off with what you might call the change that we thought we understood. For decades, when people talked about how journalism was changing, I guess for about 25 years, I mostly meant technology, the shift from print to digital, the collapse of local newspapers, audiences drifting towards national and global distractions, the rise of the smartphone, a 24/7 news cycle, the explosion of information and misinformation online, social media, Substack, TikTok, everyone became a publisher, so we lost our monopoly. And of course, the implosion of the classic media's business model based on classified ads and daily home delivered print subscriptions and advertising that once upon a time had almost nowhere else to go except for billboards. So absolutely, there's no doubt that digital media has transformed journalism in staggering ways. It has, on the plus side, accelerated news delivery, diversified content formats, empowered citizen journalists, driven database reporting, and forced traditional outlets to adopt to new storytelling tools. That's good as well. That much is I think much understood. What's becoming clear, however, and I think this is becoming clear in only recent years, is that it's not just the media environment that's changed, society itself has changed. And that may matter even more, and it may be weirdly more devastating. It may actually have some prospective good news in it as well. So first of all, and again, forgive me for stating the obvious, but I have to set up what I want to say by just, leveling the playing field here. The echo chamber effect. The rise of social media, and I mean everything from Facebook to X to Reddit to TikTok, has done something insidious. Human nature makes us gravitate towards views we already agree with, and the algorithms, of course, oblige. So we unfollow, unfriend, and unsubscribe from those who challenge us, and the result is a growing proportion of society composed of people who don't just disagree, but they live in entirely separate realities from the rest of society. Mainstream media, essentially journalism, I think, is what we mean. Journalism used to be the gatekeeper of truth. You may not have always liked what the New York Times or the BBC had to say, but you understood that they were playing by some agreed upon rules. That was the norm. And when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s in the US, basically all political sides accepted it, more or less. Enough people accepted it. Today, again, obviously, those gatekeepers in the sense of voices and platforms that are very widely trusted are rapidly diminishing, and in some countries, pretty much gone. And this has meant, on one hand, more diverse voices. That's a good thing, but also a flood of nonsense and conspiracy theories and propaganda and extremist ideologies and agendas gaining reach and influence. So we're seeing a breakdown of the shared narrative that once held societies together. And journalism was a storyteller of that narrative. In place of consensus, we now have hyperpolarization. On one hand, progressive radicals, what can I say? Progressive radicals argue that border enforcement is inherently racist, and that gender is purely a social construct, and that the West is nothing but a colonialist machine and a scam. And on the other hand, a hard right backlash rooted in nativism, nostalgia, and often thinly veiled misogyny and racism. So this polarization has seeped into discussions about everything: education and healthcare and immigration and even the weather, because of the climate change issue. It can seem that this is worse to these days in America, but it really is global. From Brazil to Hungary, from India to Israel, where I currently sit, from the Philippines to France, we're witnessing a clash between illiberal populism and progressive activism. Liberal democracy, which is the thing that gave the world so much prosperity and the thing that won the Cold War, is caught in the middle of these two extremes. It's out of fashion. It's running out of gas. And here's the thing. The classic form of journalism that my generation learned and tried to practice, certainly in the Anglo-American sphere, that journalism is attached to liberal democracy. This type of journalism seeks to be an observer and an analyst, not an activist. And that is the way, or at least was the way, to retain a wide level of support and trust. But when the system it is part of is under assault, this logic breaks down. And journalism, because it is the voice of liberal democracy in a way, in my view, and I think here maybe I'm starting to be a little less obvious, because this is a little bit controversial. When journalism is part of the thing that is under assault and it is fighting for its life, it becomes part of the political struggle. It stands for a side, no matter how much it tries to deny it. And then you start losing trust. And if it wasn't bad enough that we've lost our business model, now we're losing trust. This isn't theoretical. It's already reshaping global politics. One such earthquake, to go back to stating the obvious, is the rise of Donald Trump. Former reality show host and shyster businessman suddenly becomes president of the most powerful country on earth with a mania for disrupting the entire global order and discrediting all of his predecessors, no matter from which party. His first term shook the foundations of the liberal world order that I'm claiming is a journalistic world order, the order that was set up after World War II, cozying up to autocrats, dismissing NATO, withdrawing from international agreements, treating diplomacy as a transactional business deal always. So his approach to truth itself is no different. Manipulative, cynical, and destabilizing. Naturally, therefore, one of his main targets from the beginning was the news media. By and large, the media tried to tell the truth about what Trump was up to, what norms he was shattering, what the implications would be. So Trump goes to war with the free media, dubbing the entire industry fake news. He didn't invent this. Mussolini might have invented this. This is the autocratic playbook. And all this is accelerating now that Trump has been somehow returned to office. more in the past 3 months, maybe than ever before. America is walking away from, running away from many of the values that it once championed: free speech, global cooperation, human rights. As I said, the very concepts, the foundational concepts of liberal democracy, which include the protection of minorities, guaranteed human rights, separation of powers, rule of law, limits on the executive, and of course, freedom of the press. You see this in Hungary, you see it in Turkey, you see it, alas, in Israel. They're trying to do this. Such countries are on the path from democracy to elected autocracy. Russia illustrates the next station in this journey, which is full dictatorship, with almost no freedom of speech, with no true free press. The attack on the free press along this journey always takes the same form. One, discredit journalists as political or activist, and as I say, it's kind of true, because the journalists oppose the journey. As journalists, they must, because the journey is the way from freedom, and we stand for freedom, not just of speech, but of everything. 2, lawsuits against them. 3, laws mandating different forms of censorship, usually on false grounds of national security. 4, billionaire cronies just swimming in corruption, buying up the main media and turning them into propaganda tools for the leadership and for their business interests, which are allowed to run wild in return. And 5, if absolutely necessary, arrest, expulsion, or assassination of journalists who refuse to get the picture. So this isn't any longer about left versus right. This is about life. And it's a philosophical crisis for journalism. Because in a world where truth is subjective, where facts are weaponized, where partisan loyalty often requires denying reality, journalism is basically at war with the system. And the question no longer is how we deliver the news. The question is, what is the role of journalism in such an era? Now, for years, our instinct in the Anglo-American sphere, less so in Romania, and somewhere in the middle, maybe in Romance language Europe, but at least in the Anglo-American sphere, which is what my former employer at AP, I think, represents the apotheosis of. The instinct has been to double down on just the facts, stick to objectivity, be impartial, and that instinct comes from a very noble place. The AP, I think, may be a global standard bearer of this approach, trusted by outlets across the political spectrum because they have to, because they basically license the news to everyone. It would be the easiest thing in the world to sit here in such a discussion and argue that we just continue this. And most professors of journalism, I think, would applaud it. But I'm actually concluding that this model, valuable as it is no longer quite enough. In fact, if taken to extremes, it can be harmful. And in a sense, this stems from what one might call the myth of pure objectivity. Every choice a journalist makes is a judgment call, a subjective judgment call. Which stories to pursue, which voices to include, which context to provide. Our worldview, our education, our experience, our situation, our interests, if we stray away from professionalism, it all affects these decisions. It shapes everything. It's not a flaw, it's the reality. This event here today is happening. It's news objectively, but it will probably not be turned into a news story by anyone because of the subjective but correct assessment that it's not interesting to enough people. Journalism is rife with subjectivity. But American journalists in particular are trained to pretend otherwise, to act like blank slates reporting from some higher plane of pure objectivity. The result is that we sometimes, I think, mislead the public because we're pretending not to think. And the public senses the dishonesty. And it's yet another factor that causes them to lose trust. And it's a catch-22. Because if we take sides, we lose trust. If we pretend to not have a side, in this case on the side of liberal democracy and freedom of speech, we're being dishonest, and again we lose trust. It's tricky. We've seen this with climate denial and anti-vaccine hysteria and conspiracy theories about election fraud. We see it with claims that are current today, like tax cuts pay for themselves or tariffs are a tax cut. Never-ending nonsense, and we have to pretend like there are two sides when there aren't two sides. It's called both sidesism. And it's bad. Giving all views equal weight, no matter how baseless, we create the illusion that truth is up for debate. And by presenting the so-called both sides as equally valid when one side is nonsense, we do a disservice to society, I think. And I'm not claiming there's an easy fix. People rightly complain that the media is already too partisan, too noisy, and too reactive. And it's true that some coverage sounds more like politics than journalism. I realize these are competing narratives, but one supposed definition of intelligence is the ability to retain and deal with more than one narrative in your brain and find a way to make them coalesce. I think we need to embrace transparency, to be clear about where we're coming from, to explain our reasoning, to show our work. It's to recognize that just like doctors and engineers, journalists have expertise. We, not all of us, but many, in many cases, spend years understanding systems, interviewing experts, uncovering wrongdoing. We should be allowed, we should be encouraged to connect the dots. The upside is that A, this is necessary in a world that grows ever more complex. B, it's more interesting than the pretense of pure objectivity. Sometimes people don't know what they want. Sometimes they say they want something they actually don't. People will tell you they don't want this. The data shows otherwise. They're looking for credible connecting of the dots. And that doesn't mean abandoning fairness. It means replacing pretense with honesty. I would submit that the world is too complex for pure stenography. Journalism must focus on something more explanatory, more contextual, and in a way more courageous. We also need to update our ethical codes, transparency about what we know, what we don't know, why we made the choices that we made. I think that can do more trust than pretending that we don't have a point of view. We don't tell doctors to avoid recommending treatments. We don't tell scientists to stop interpreting data. Why are we telling journalists not to draw informed conclusions? This doesn't happen in all societies, but this happens, for sure it happens at AP. And at AP, I left AP 5 or 6 years ago. Towards the end of it, I was probably the main proponent in the leadership of the company for more explanatory journalism, rather than just investigation and just reportage. And I realize I think Ovidiu, if he's in the audience, might disagree with me, but I think it's a legitimate debate. And if we do want to do more towards connecting the dots, for explaining, the digital revolution is actually giving us amazing tools to achieve that. Satellite imagery and open source intelligence and real-time dashboards of every kind, and all this data and international collaborations that the digital world enables. Journalism's never had more power to illuminate truth. But we just have to use it wisely. So, to sum up, we need better explanatory journalism. I think that's critical, and that's a way to actually retain or restore trust. And we need to use the existing tools wisely. The nuclear science gave us both nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, creation and destruction. And I think the digital revolution that has A, destroyed our business model or badly rattled it, and B, in the short to midterm, I think done harm to society. We haven't yet seen the results of it, neither for society nor for journalism. It's still the beginning of the story. And I think basically there's hope for us yet if we really focus on the things we need to do. I have a list here of things I would advise. We need opinion sections that welcome dissent, not just reinforce the worldview of billionaire owners. We need journalists to be trained not only to report, but to think like entrepreneurs, to build new institutions where old ones fail. We need to embrace new models, maybe nonprofits like ProPublica, member-funded platforms like actually The Guardian, basically, cross-border collaborations like the ICIJ. And of course, we need AI literacy. The AI thing may be the ultimate example of technology that can bring about great good, but tremendous destruction. These tools can help with productivity and accuracy, but also risk spreading misinformation and worse, and putting everyone out of business. journalism, I think, needs to lead this debate. Um, I think journalism is more than reportage, as I am more than suggesting, but rather the place for intelligent discourse. Um, so, going back to the beginning, is it really true that there's nothing new under the sun? In one sense, no, because journalism has evolved massively over the past several centuries, basically, that it's existed in something resembling current form. And today's iteration is a new one, in a society that seems to renew itself every day. But in a very deep sense, yeah, there in fact is nothing new under the sun. Journalism remains what it's always been, if I think viewed correctly. You find out the truth about things that matter. You argue your case if you believe in it. You explain to the world, to the audience, or to whoever wants to listen, what you have discovered. And you try to do it with some style. I think sometimes we forget that you have to be interesting, and therefore the style in which you go about this is as critical as even as the ethics. That hasn't changed, and I don't think it will. That's all I got.
Can we have the lights on again? That was great, Dan. Thank you very much. We'll both.
How does it work now? Are various mentors each speak in turn?
Well, we're going to have 2 or 3 people speaking after you, speaking to the same rubric as you, and then we'll throw it open to a fairly large audience. So if you can stick around and take questions, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, Dan covered a massive amount of ground and extremely eloquently and with great depth of knowledge and perception. So I would just go off on a couple of his points. I agree totally that we do need better explanatory journalism. When you write a news story, you as a journalist know why you're telling that news story. It's an important strand of a narrative. It says something about a situation, a story, a country, something that's developing. But often it's, I've seen it in Romanian journalism, there'll be a headline and there won't be an explanation. You have to remember you're addressing your audience, but you're also writing for the record. So in 5 years, somebody might go back to that story. Why are you writing about this? So I think it's very important, very high up into the story, to say why this story is important. And you do need a certain amount of courage or confidence or experience to say that. You know, that's why there are editors as well. It's not just that this happened, why it's important and in what context it happens. So I agree with Dan, that is the way forward. We have to remember that we're not just writing for audiences now, or for people who know exactly who Elena Lasconi is, and you know the fact that she doesn't. Why is this important? But what it meant in the bigger context, in the bigger story. So I think that is something I would think is important. Yeah, and more collaboration. And Dan is right. We have masses of tools, and before we used to go back into the files to see what happened. You know, in this year to see what nowadays you just go on to Google, and it's very you can just get facts instantaneously. But you know, by the same token, you have to be careful because you can get facts quite easily. It's very easy to misreport something or to get wrong information. So, like the question we were asked before, did Donald Trump say this? In fact, the answer should have been, I'll check it out and I'll get back to you. And that's what we should always be doing, checking it out and get it back to you, because there's too much information out there and it's easy to bite on what comes because that seems like it would be right. Yes, I've heard that before, so it must be true. But we were being told about the narrative with the airplane, MH17, that there were 20 Russian narratives, and then there was the forensic investigation from the Dutch. And people, yes, that is correct, but there were all these other versions, so we're not quite sure. So it is very important to fact check, I think, more than ever before, because so fact or information is so easily accessible.
Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Alison, and thanks, Dan. It's good that you're still with us. I mean, I agree with you very much. We do need more, and with Alison, we need more explanatory journalism. If you read the BBC website, we're doing more and more Q&A, you know, more background, more explanation, why the story is important, what are the main elements of it. I think I've never heard, until you just said it, Dan, anyone say so clearly that that journalism is, or has been until now, the voice of liberal democracy. I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, Western journalism, yeah. And it's something I thought about covering the fall of communism, actually. You know, I used to be challenged by members of the Central Committee of the Hungarian Communist Party that why am I reporting on 20 men and women meeting in a private flat to form a new group or a new opposition to the 800,000 strong Communist Party. And I felt, and I would explain then to them, and I guess what you've just said is why I bothered to report on Viktor Orban in 1988, you know, saying things. So we were even then, and we are still now, voices of liberal democracy. But I have the privilege or the burden of living in a country under the same Viktor Orban now, who for 15 years has actually declared war on liberal democracy and his model, as seen by the recent visit of someone you know well, Benjamin Netanyahu, to Hungary, or the welcome that his ideas have been given by the incoming Trump administration. So, yeah, we are, we're under attack, as you say. I go to a lot of trouble in my reporting to report what Viktor Orban and his government are thinking and try and make it sound reasonable. So perhaps I'm guilty of what you say, you know, that the truth doesn't lie equidistant between 2 points, I guess. But I do think, partly because, you know, 3 million people vote for him at each election and he keeps getting elected, I do have a duty to my readers to explain why he's so popular and to represent, in perhaps even more reasonable terms than Mr. Orban or his government would put, his point of view. You know, you've missed some of the discussions here, Dan. It's a shame not to have you here in the room, and not to mention the bar in the evening. But you know, we've been talking about a lot of things here, and it's, as you know, it's very nice. One of the beauties of the Ratu Foundation and of being able to meet in this space here is there's so many young journalists here and people are interested in journalism. And things are getting harder. And I don't think necessarily that in the longer run, journalism will be the voice of liberal democracy anymore. Probably because there are so many journalists on the right now coming up with other narratives. And that's difficult. And it's a space we're all trying to navigate. Because again, you know, I've said some of my contributions here have been to say, you know, I'm optimistic because there's nothing new under the sun, as you said. And sometimes actually I think it is. I would just give one practical example. I recently covered Xi's visit to Budapest. And we were trying to film lots of Chinese people, either because they were living in Hungary, but I suspect because they were brought in from Serbia or from neighboring countries, were lining the streets of Budapest with giant red flags. And Xi's convoy was about to arrive from the airport. And I set up a live position to try, I wanted lots of Chinese flags in the background to say, here are all these people come to welcome Xi. And the leader of the Chinese people came over and he said, please don't film us. We don't want our faces to be shown on the BBC. And I said, I'm really sorry, I really need to film you people because that's part of the story. Your president's about to arrive. How come you're not proud of your president? But he insisted, and so what we did, we moved to the other side of the road, so we were further away. They were really in the distance. No one with the best definition Chinese television on earth would be able to identify them from the pictures. But the man took exception to this, and he actually came over with us and started flying his big red flag in front of our camera, so we couldn't film anything. So I asked the Hungarian police to intervene and stop this man interrupting me doing my job, and he wouldn't. And I had this sort of vision at that moment of what if a Chinese-style surveillance society takes deeper root with the help of facial recognition software, with the help of all the things that are happening in the world, that what if China does replace the United States or even the old United States as the main the biggest or the only superpower? And where does that leave us journalists then? I don't think I'm going to be getting much help from the Hungarian police on that day.
Thanks, Nick. Let me just come in with a brief comment of my own, and then we'll throw it open to all you. Dan has said he's going to stay around, so think of questions to ask him. I want to do a kind of, not exactly taking the devil's position, but the angelic position against what he said. And what I'm going to say are things which I either believe or in part believe or are beginning to put to myself. And I think that everyone who has remained in a democracy should do this at some time, and perhaps most of all journalists. You should test yourself as to see how deep your beliefs are, or how far the beliefs have just been picked up from other sources and remain, as it were, clothed with you, but not examined. Dan made a large point and a good point about the pressures which are now on, which are now on liberal democracy. I would separate that to at least to an extent. There was certainly, it doesn't seem to me that democracy, parliamentary democracy, is fundamentally threatened, although in some parts of the world it has been, but not all that many. What has been threatened, not so much threatened, but challenged, is liberalism. And it's been challenged and is still being challenged by both in Europe and North America and elsewhere in different forums. It's being challenged because it's seen to have been, and actually has been, a failure in certain key aspects. And the main ones of these are that it's presided over in the last 20 or 30 years, either a stasis or an actual fall in working lower middle class incomes. And that has gone, of course, it's been noted, it's been deplored, governments have tried to do something about it, but it adds up in the last 20, 30, even perhaps 40 years of a fall, of a decline, both in working class and lower middle class power and ability, spending ability, having a better life ability. And that seems to me to be the fundamental challenge and one of the main fundamental reasons why the new parties, the new so-called right or far right parties, one of which is succeeding in this country, in Romania, through the alliance, the AUR, and at the moment the leader of the AUR, Simeon, is leading in the polls. And the same thing is true throughout Europe. In most cases, it varies, but in most cases, there is a new right party with a fairly strong following, which tends to be growing. And these are seen as a threat. And they may turn out to be in some cases. When one looks at the Alternative for Deutschland and some other parties, including the far-right party in Austria, you can see traces, at least, in some of the elements of that party of Nazism and fascism. People who use the tropes of fascism and Nazism in their speeches, not overtly, but as it were, signaling to others whom they think may think like them in order to create a group who are more on the extreme right. Though no party, as far as I know of, has yet gone over to that. It may be called new right or far right and so on, but actually most of them, Italy being the key country in this, have actually adopted, in most cases, liberalism. The Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is for all intents and purposes a liberal. She believes in the West, she believes in NATO, though that doesn't necessarily make you a liberal. She believes in the tenets of free speech. She doesn't attack, although to some extent that she disapproves of in part, she doesn't attack or make illegal any part of the LGBTQ plus movement, which has been one of the strongest movements in the last 20 years and has brought gays and others into society, away from prejudice, not entirely, of course, in a way which seems to my generation almost impossible, coming out of a period in which they were routinely exploited and insulted. At the same time, the Christian religion, which is certainly a minority, is now growing stronger. And it's growing stronger. It's left behind its old past, where it used to burn people at stakes, on stakes, which who disagreed with them. But it's now become, by and large, in most countries, a place where people go in order to do good, or to try to do good, or to find out ways in which they can do good. Looking at the figures of Christianity, especially Christ himself, and taking him and others as a model. And that seems to me that growth, which is now quite strong in many countries, seems to me to be, whether or not you believe in Christianity, seems to me to be a healthy one, because it's taking an already existing ideology, Christianity, and taking the best parts of it and using it in society. Parliaments, again, it's partial, what's happening to parliaments, but by and large they continue to exist and actually are continuing to be treasured, continue to be used, continuing to assure people that they will have at least a small voice, one vote every so often, and that they can, if they get fed up with the government, as the British got fed up with the Conservative government, they can throw the bastards out. We still have banks which guard our money. We still have in the UK at least, a BBC which, although it can be annoying, we can trust. It reports in good faith. The reporters report in good faith. They may not always get it right. Indeed, they often can't get it right. Partly in Nick's example, because somebody holds a big red flag in front of them. But they try their best to get it right, as do many newspapers, many podcasts. Part of the internet and the social media is dedicated to putting out news. Some of it is is bad, some of it is evil. But much of it actually is an attempt to understand the world in different ways, and it's spread throughout society. So what I would say, and I think what's happening is that a new kind of, at least in Europe, and it's evident in this country, as I say, it's evident in my country, in the United Kingdom, a new movement has begun to grow and is regarded, I think, in many cases unjustly as dangerous. It may not work. A lot of it has been replacing the left-wing parties, which no longer command much of a following in many countries, although in my own country, the Labour Party is the party of government. But they're growing because they say, at least, that they are there to protect the interests of working class, lower middle class people. That may be hypocrisy. If and when they get into government, they may not be able to govern very well, but they are a new force which at least you'd have a chance to come to government if they can get a majority, and to rule if they can get a majority. Trump is clearly a threat to much of what liberalism has stood for. But what strikes me over the last week or so is that the other elements of American society, most of all, of course, business now, because they're being hit by Trump, but also actually by the opposition in certain respects, by a Supreme Court, which he himself created, or many of the people in the Supreme Court were put there by him. Even it is drawing back from agreeing with Trump, and I would imagine still does. In fact, I think that sooner or later, the Republican Party, which he regards with contempt, and but which he has for the last several years led, will at some point soon realize that it itself has to recover some kind of critical distance, at least, from Trump, and recover itself as what it had been before, a right-wing party, but fully democratic, and in many cases, a useful party, both at state level and at national level. So these are the issues I would put against a view that we're living through a terrible decline in democracy, in civil society, and of course in journalism. Journalism strikes me still as being a place where men and women can go, can find the truth, can learn the rules of journalism, can get used to the stresses and strains of journalism, and come up with, as we earlier spoke about in this session, in the previous session to this, that they can find the facts which act as pillars of something we can call the truth. And most people in journalism can still understand that this is the point of journalism, is to find out facts which support the truth. Truth, all of the truth can never be told. But what journalism can do is to take out the important facts on which a bed of truth can lie and be recognized by people as at least a skeleton of what has happened in complex situations in society and in politics. But journalism remains capable of doing that, and although it has been weakened at times and is being attacked, it always has been attacked, then it's very far away from being lost. That's my pitch. Dan is still there, so please ask your questions or put your points of view.
Just to add what you say, which I agree with, but then I've found the last few months, particularly the political situation, is doing our job as a journalist is seen as a political stance that is hostile to the far right. If there is a story, there's some disinformation, and you come and you write another story explaining that, you are seen doing your job as a journalist, as I would see it, as an enemy. But then, as a journalist, you shouldn't mind that.
No, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add on, there was a report on an independent investigation of the BBC's coverage of the migration issue last year, which largely found that our journalism was of high quality and reflecting the diversity of views about the very controversial issue, especially nowadays from a British perspective of migration. And it validated the fact that we as reporters in the field spend so much time talking to migrants, including people migrating illegally across borders, including crossing the channel in small boats, which is very controversial. But our journalism was also applauded by The Independent for giving voice to the many people in our own country, in Britain, who are deeply worried about the numbers of people entering the country legally or illegally. And so, but here, that's a typical example of a sort of right-wing agenda, the traditionally anti-migrant and anti-immigrant agenda, and our liberal democratic practice as journalists of spending time talking to people who are actually breaking the law because they say they're fleeing hunger, persecution, or violence. And so I think that is an example of how, despite the attacks we come under as from our listeners and viewers and readers, of where we are managing to cover even the concerns of the lower, including the concerns of lower middle class people who are worried for their jobs.
Yeah, indeed.
May I also
Please.
chime in?
Yeah, sorry.
I think we can't paint all the right with the same brush. So you I think very accurately, John, noted that this is a reaction in a way to the market failures of liberalism. But some of it is reasonable. On the immigration argument, there's no right and wrong, frankly, in my view. So sure, the BBC doesn't fail. But there are cases where there is right and wrong and there is true and false. And those elements of the new ascendant right-wing movements around the world that actually have genuinely authoritarian dictatorial instincts, they are going to be at war with journalism because journalism cannot live. And if they have support, then journalism will be at war with part of its market. I don't see any way around this. And it attaches to something I've realized thinking about liberal democracy all over the world. I've had, because of my career as a foreign correspondent, the rare delight of living all over the world in very, very different places. I've lived in Romania and in Egypt and in Israel and in Puerto Rico and in Britain and America. Such different places.
Yeah.
They all share the same thing, though. And it's been amazing when I've realized this, to come to realize this. If you ask most people in all these countries how they define democracy, the vast majority are going to say free and fair elections. And that's pretty much all they want. If you start asking them, well, what about the bric-a-brac of liberal democracy? Checks and balances, individual rights, minority rights, all the stuff we all know, without which, in my view, it's not democracy, because 51% can decide to kill 49%. And that doesn't sound so democratic. Yeah, if you take the ad absurdum position like I just did, most people won't allow 51% to kill everyone else. But they're not really attached to the idea that democracy is much, much more than a dictatorship of the majority. They kind of accept a dictatorship of the majority. Basically, they do. And if you ask me, as a liberal Democrat who sees journalism as the voice of liberal democracy, I'm oversimplifying, but only somewhat. Well, but wait a minute. Do you favor an elite caste of people imposing liberal democracy on the majority? I think the answer is yes, I do. And that is what the framers of the US Constitution did, basically. That's what liberal democracy is. It's an elite project to impose a more decent system on the majority of the people that might not necessarily want it. And the Trump phenomenon has exposed this, and the failures of liberalism to bring about enough prosperity broadly enough based have given them tools to use. And they're using those tools to address a different issue, which is their lust for power. And let me just say one last thing. How journalism really attaches to this is I believe that people have to pay for journalism. I know that makes me old school, and I'll be run out of town because it's so out of fashion to tell people to pay for content. But you know, the person who said information wants to be free also said it also needs to be expensive. That second bit is forgotten. And I think people who are educated, and I'm sorry, gonna oftentimes be intelligent, and I'm really sorry, but are oftentimes going to be more wealthy and prosperous, are going to pay for news, and are going to pay for the FT and the Economist and Le Monde and Haaretz and my Substack, and they're going to just pay for news, and they're going to be better informed, and they're always going to be the minority, and the majority of people are going to be the hoi polloi who are getting whatever's out there for free, and being manipulated, and all the agendas, and all the disinformation, and all the horror of it. And as a result, you're going to have a two-tier society that attaches to the two tiers of journalism. The payers of the paid journalism are going to be better informed, and they're going to increasingly disdain the majority who aren't. And that's not good for democracy. That it's going to be ring-fenced this way, and they're going to be living in their gated communities reading The Economist. I hate to be the harbinger of this doom, but I see it clearly. You know, and for our lifetime, like all of us here, kind of like middle-aged, I think, these mentors that we have, the educated, wealthy, intelligent, sophisticated people were proponents of democracy. Even before our lifetime, the people who were agitating for suffrage for women, before which there was no democracy anywhere, they were the people I mentioned, the educated, the intellectual elite, the rich. They were for democracy, for liberal democracy, but this is flipped. And I saw it very clearly in Egypt. When Sisi did a coup against the elected Morsi, all my friends in the Egyptian elite who were better educated, they were the ones who were going to Ivy League schools and to your Oxbridge over in Britain. And they were the people who should be for democracy. They were delighted that democracy had been suspended and maybe eliminated because they didn't believe in democracy. They actually were in the place where I fear that the West may be going, where only a tiny amount of people only a tiny amount of people think they have the capability for self-governance, and they think most people don't. They just think this, and that's not a democratic thing to think. But this is one version of the dystopia that we're headed toward if we're not careful. And I think journalism attaches to it in the way that I mentioned.
You've revealed yourself as a liberal tyrant. And there may be many
If the shoe
others.
fits.
Whereas I'm an unliberal populist. Well, we should open out. We should meet and talk more about this, because it's what you're saying is it's in some ways it's very inspiring. It certainly makes you think. But before Dan has to go, come and yeah, somebody right at the back. Yeah.
Done. Hi. Misha is talking.
Hey, Misha.
Yeah. My question would be about the identity crisis that we have today. And you said about that it used to be a narrative which journalists were advocating for and spending, widespreading a narrative. But now the situation is not so because we have polarized, radicalized society. And in your view, like in Romanian elections, we see an identity crisis. People are not united by a narrative. They are really divided. What would you say about the future of that approach of one narrative that unites people? What identity that will unite people in the future, in your opinion, should be, or how would you say, how would you draw maybe that kind of identity of the future? Because if people are not united by a strong identity, at least citizens of one country, which they value as their interest as well, we have no future society. Yeah, I believe. And which role of journalists in that identity crisis and with in renovating this identity? People, would you
That's
say?
great. Is that question addressed to me?
Yeah, done. Yeah.
Look, I don't think you can impose the shared narrative. I'm in no way proposing that. That sounds authoritarian. It reminds me of communism a little bit. It almost always fails. Nor do I want to be misunderstood as disdaining the populist right. I think a lot of the backlash against liberalism is very well deserved, and I think in some cases the debate is highly legitimate. I mentioned immigration before. In America, there's a lot of racism in the way that Trump approaches Latino immigration to the U.S., but the idea that you have to have an open border and any attempt to police it is, I don't know what, crime against humanity, that's nonsensical. I think I come down on the Republican side more than the Democratic side on that issue. I think in Romania, there's a legitimate debate about which side you want to ally, the degree to which you believe in the post-World War II edifice established in Europe and NATO and the European Union, all the rest of it. I mean, I have my own view on what's good for Romania, but I don't think the alternative is illegitimate. If AUR wins the election based on convincing people of some message that isn't lies, but something, but rather a preference, that's fine. I do, however, note that we have a false equivalence about which side lies more. Right now in history, at this moment where we are, the right lies more. Okay, you look at PolitiFact in the U.S., everyone lies. That's a narrative, but of course, the idea that everyone lies usually is in the service of liars, or the biggest liars. The idea that everyone's corrupt is in the service of the totally corrupt, because if everyone's guilty, then no one's guilty. Trump, PolitiFact has him at like 80% untrue comments. Hillary Clinton was like, she lies too, but it was like 18%. So I think our challenge for journalism, we shouldn't push for one narrative or the other than to try to militate for the truth. As John said and as Nick said, like they tried. Proper journalism, BBC, they try at least to militate for the truth. And our challenge is, in this particular era of the rise of populism from the right, what happens when truth becomes a political position? I didn't expect to have that happen in my lifetime, but it has. And we have to be careful not to say, okay, we're against the right, because that's not right either. We simply have to be on the side of the truth, and we have to hope that truth will cease to be a political position, and that people will not be so easily manipulated. And the two young journalists I met with before, they asked me, what would you do? What would you do? Because we had the same discussion. What would you do if you could change one thing about the world to make journalism be viable again, what would you do? And I said this: more or less, what happens in democratic countries reflects the will of the people, more or less, sometimes more directly, sometimes indirectly. So it is very damning of humanity and a very sad comment on human nature that in almost every democratic country where I have lived, teachers in a public school system are paid less than the average. It's a public school system, and therefore that is a decision that society has made. And that kind of mistake is tough to bounce back from. Okay? If I had one thing I could change, it would be to pay public school teachers like bankers. I mean, I'm sorry, it's a vocation and it's not a transaction, and people love to be a teacher, but you know what? You'd have better teachers. And that would also reflect a general attitude towards education. And you'd have smarter people, basically. And I think that the vulnerability of society at large to disinformation coming from bad faith political circles is a reflection of this failure of education, basically.
Who's next?
Now I'd like to raise a question about where do you draw the line between seeking the truth and telling the truth and social responsibility? Because journalism is not only about ourselves, it's not about ourselves doing our job, it's about the effect we have on society. And I will give you a few examples. We have here, for example, a party called USR, which was considered the only opposition pro-European Democratic Party. In a certain time, many people from that party called us with stories about how things go wrong in the interior of the party, how they are not democratic, how they kill voices that are against some politics. And we struggled I had a real internal battle, because if you are telling the truth, which journalists do, and finally we did it, you might have a negative effect on the society, because here in Romania, many people tend to say all parties are the same history. If they lost trust in the last party, for example, opposition party, they may not go to vote. In a certain way, through the articles, you may influence the voting intention, and you may influence the fate of a country, after all. And I had a real internal struggle thinking what to do, because it was on one side social responsibility, on the other side, if a party is a duck and it is selling itself as a swan, well, and you do not tell the truth, you are complice to that party selling a fake images, and people will vote a fake. Finally, of course, we decided to publish part of the stories, the most important stories, because we do not want to cover something negative, to put the, I don't know, in English. And because some people in the party trusted their story to us, so we had a duty to do. Some of the two examples, short example, we had, for example, at a certain point in the public space, an audio recording, a dialogue between the leader of extreme far-right party, AUR, and another political character. It was an outrageous discussion that harmed the image of the truth. We were the only publication in Romania who thought it would be good to analyze, to send that recording to a specialist. And that specialist in the United States said it's a fake. We published the information, none in the media took our story, because mass media considered that it is good that AUR had a bad image in the eyes of Romania. And the last example, Călin Georgescu, everybody hated on the right side of the history, hated Călin Georgescu, and huge fake news was in all the mass media. Călin Georgescu asked for a referendum for Romania to go out of NATO. We listened to the interview he gave to an American Australian influencer, I don't know. And he didn't say this. He really didn't say this. And we consider it's our duty to say that he didn't say this, not in order to defend Călin Georgescu, but because me, as a reporter, for example, when I speak with the people, people do not trust mass media because they say mass media manipulates, mass media tell lies. And I thought it is not okay that mass media is telling a large-scale lie because it affects our own profession. And I thought it is good to tell the truth. So to summarize, where do you draw the line between telling the truth and social responsibility? Because there are truths that it is okay to say, and truths that if you say, well, might do more harm than good.
I don't know to who you're asking, but look, I mentioned before
I think it's something everybody should think about.
But look, there's no right answer,
Yeah.
okay? Because there's we don't favor political assassinations, obviously, right? Like that assassinations are not a good thing. Well, who here would have been very sad if Hitler got assassinated? Okay, almost no one. So it's not a principle. It's sort of it's a judgment. So I think the correct answer is you tell the truth. I mean, if you're a journalist, you got to tell the truth, and you have to trust in the people that they will do with the truth what should be done. But there are limits. If telling the truth is going to mean that everyone dies, you're not going to tell the truth. Now, that's generally not going to be the case, so you can go about your life without this dilemma. But the reality is there's a gray zone, and you always have to weigh a little bit of social responsibility. To say that you don't, it would be a lie. But I certainly don't think that Călin Georgescu, being helped by not lying about what he said, is in a gray zone. Of course, he should tell the truth. Obviously. I'm just admitting that there are times when it won't be so obvious and you'll be a little bit challenged because you think the truth will do too much damage. And then in the end, you have to decide, are you a citizen first or a journalist first? And I think most journalists I know who are high quality journalists and high quality media, serious journalists, I think they would say I'm a journalist first. And I think they're fooling themselves. Because I think if you press them enough, you'll discover, in fact, they're citizens first. And there's an example just from a couple of weeks ago. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, was exposed to war plans by these idiots in the Signal chat. Honestly, I mean, my main concern was how dumb they are. These are the people running the world right now. Well, if he was a journalist first, he should have immediately exposed the war plans against the Houthis in Yemen and put the pilots at risk or something, because they didn't know there was a journalist in the group. And he's not just a journalist. He's the editor of one of the most respected publications in the Western world. And he didn't report what he saw and what he heard because he thought that would be irresponsible. And at some point, after the plans had happened, so he's no longer endangering the pilots, he thought it was important to reveal that this had happened, just so basically because he wants them to be more careful about exposing journalists to the war plans. But he still wouldn't say what was there. That's how much he was a citizen first. He still didn't reveal what he heard. And it was only when these idiots started lying about what was on that chat that he then exposed it. Because why? Because they pissed him off, because they were lying. And at that point, he was a person first, and he just revealed all of it and essentially published the transcript, which was indeed a shocking breach of security. So this guy was a citizen first initially, and then a reporter first, and then a human being with vindictiveness last. And that's, I think, how we all are. There's no simple answer, and life is full of grays.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dan, this is going back a little bit to what you said about when telling the truth becomes a political position. And I remembered an op-ed I wrote in December which is sort of linked to it, saying the day when it suddenly wasn't okay to be pro-European in Romania. For the last 20 years, Romania has broadly been on a pro-Atlantic, pro-NATO and pro-EU course. It was never questioned. In fact, it was a decision taken in Snagov in 1995, if I'm not mistaken. All the political parties of that time decided the Snagov Agreement that Romania's future path would be pro-Atlantic. So this was a given. It was not considered even political. But as we know in Romania, the far right made historic gains. They took about 30% of the parliament. And Victor Ilie, who was here earlier, I wrote that he'd reported in Snoop.ro, a bit of investigative reporting, that adverts for herbal remedies and saints were placed on Romania TV and Realitate Plus, and they were financed by this AdNow, which you talked about, which is a digital advertising company connected to the Kremlin. Now, after he'd reported this, because everybody was wondering how Russia had sort of got their tentacles, shall we say, into Romania, he got a phone call from somebody who is head of the United Thracia. Now, that's a Călin Georgescu supporting group. And he told him this. So this is what his vision for the far right would be if the far right takes control of Romania. And this is a translation from Romanian to English. All the systems in Romania will be cancelled, including journalists who have lied to the people. Don't you get it? We know everything about you, what you do, what you eat, everything. So we're not talking, to me, we're not talking about a different political stance here. We're talking about an ideology when they actually want to overturn the whole system that Romania has been since 1989. No, Victor did the publishing Snoop, and he was threatened by this man who's connected to Victor Ilie, but I reported it in an editorial. And he was threatened, saying this: all the systems will be cancelled, after he made a report that AdNow, this digital advertising connected to the Kremlin, had been placing adverts. So basically revealing the way that Russia was acting in Romania, and which is, you know, the truth, the facts. But it wasn't just he just said, threatened him, it's all the systems will be cancelled. You've lied to the people. We know everything about you.
But Alison, what would you advocate be done if a majority of the people want to overturn a system? And taking it even more absurdly, what would you advocate be done if a majority of the people don't want to hear the truth? And they say, and they're conscious of it, and they tell you, we want to be fed lies because we're happier that way. So the hell with you, we're going to arrest all the journalists. And they're 62%. What do you do with that? Do you impose on them a different system?
No, I become a civilian then. I don't think anybody wants a country ruled by anarchy and violence. I mean, any normal person. I mean, there are laws in Romania. You can't just overturn a system like that. I think it's our job as journalists to inform what would happen if these people get control of Romania. I mean,
no one can argue that. People should know. I'm asking, what do you do if they consciously want it?
You inform them what would happen.
And they know, and they say, we want this.
No, they don't want to.
Listen. So before I somewhat edgily said, I'm not so sure I don't favor an elite imposition of a certain system.
Side, aren't I?
But that's not a popular position.
No.
I sound like an elitist and not so much a Democrat.
Position. But it's like, was it good to cancel the elections? How I describe it is Romania could have lost a hand or it could have lost its life. Neither position is great, but they took the least bad of all the of bad decisions. They took the least harmful one. I mean, going back to this is a Romanian actor, Victor Hrebenchuk, 91 years old. And he had taken part in pro-European anti-Georgescu protests. Now, he's a respected actor in Romania. And he was threatened with an axe in my head. So this is the mood, the kind of mood that was around in those days. That the far right, if they had control of Romania, violence. Whereas that you could say, you know, it's very easy to criticize the mainstream parties, but they have never threatened violence against journalists or people who don't agree with them.
Anybody else want to come in to ask questions to us, or Dan, who's still there? Certainly, really is going over us, I think. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question regarding Trump, so I'm kind of going to switch the registry here a bit from what we've spoken so far. One of Donald Trump's biggest enemies since he's taken his second term has been this thing called DEI, which I'm pretty sure all of you are up to date with and have an idea of what it means. So it's obvious to me, and maybe to some of you as well, that since Donald Trump has taken office in January, he started by taking revenge over a lot of things that have happened during the Biden administration, and has consistently tried to push back as many of the things that were approved during the Biden administration, including this thing. And the DEI policies, he's initiated this huge, massive crackdown at a federal level. And many of the companies owned by the billionaires that stand behind him started to fall in line, and now it's happening on a way larger scale. But not just that, and this is actually my point, they started contacting companies in Europe that have ties to US embassies. It was a very discreet kind of operation, requesting for those companies to also fall in line with this crackdown on DEI policies. And my question is, when this guy has been in office for the second time for only 4 months, and there's still like 3 years and something to go, what is there to be done in terms of reporting on this issue without falling in the trap of supporting his narrative? I don't know if it makes sense to you, what I'm asking.
I see you're looking at me. I'm not sure I understand the question, but if you mean what do we do about reporting on this,
Yeah.
and you're implying that this is so evil that we have to report on it taking a side. If that's the case, I would push back a little bit, because the DEI debate is an extension and amplification of the old debate about affirmative action. It comes down to that. And some people will say it has to be a meritocracy, and the company would be betraying its stockholders, the people who in good faith bought its shares, if it did anything to bring in anyone other than the best candidate. If it takes into account any version of social justice, that is leaving money on the table, that is a betrayal of the shareholders, and that is wrong capitalistically. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but there's an argument to be made that affirmative action is wrong. And affirmative action in America, historically, before the obsession with gender and sexuality, it was about Black people, white people. That was the thing. And many Black people in America oppose affirmative action because they argue that this perpetuates their dependency. It's a sort of welfare that victimizes the victim, and all these arguments. And I've wrestled with this myself. I like social justice, and I've tended to favor affirmative action and therefore DEI because of the argument that says the people that seem the best candidate for a job aren't necessarily the best candidate for a job. They're just the ones who've been given the opportunity to prove it. And you're actually leaving aside all these better candidates who had the misfortune of going to poorer schools in the inner cities and having the playing field isn't level. So there's so much wrong about society that it's better for society and ultimately for capitalism if we help out a certain subgroup of people. But my point is, this is a legitimate debate. To not favor AI is not necessarily, DEI is not necessarily to be evil. It's a classic case of a political discourse where no one has a monopoly on truth and justice. It's complex. So that's how I would favor reporting on DEI. Now, yeah, the current U.S. administration is at war with affirmative action to a degree that is off-putting, and I think is going to lead to injustice. But my point is, it's a legitimate thing on which to report the facts and let the people decide. Did I in any way address the question?
Sort of, yeah. It's a legitimate answer, and I understand your stance. So, thank you.
This is the last chance for anybody to come in.
Thank you, Dan. This is Nikolai Ratsium. Yeah, so good to see you on our screen instead of just the YouTube stream, all right?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person.
I wondered if you shared John's positive view of pushback from the Supreme Court and even possibly from the Republican Party. And let's call it even the judiciary, or some of the judiciary, and some of the legal profession, and so on. Do you think that's enough and it's building? Do you have faith in it that we can see something, at least by the midterms, that we're going to see a change and a stopping of the Trump mania?
I mean, that's a purely political question. Look, the Supreme Court has pushed back a little, yes, and it basically comes down to Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts, and as a result of that, these two guys are in crosshairs of MAGA at this point, or she and he are. So yeah, the Supreme Court has a conservative supermajority, but at least two of them are sufficiently decent and professional as jurists that there may be some hope there, but I wouldn't place too much hope in them. The judiciary in America has been desperately corrupted by politics. It's kind of funny, like I advocate against the politicization of the judiciary in Israel, where I currently am, and like Nick, I bemoan what happened in Hungary. I remember when I'm old enough to remember when Orban was a liberal and a Democrat. But in America, where I come from, it's completely politicized. You elect sheriffs and prosecutors and judges in some cases. It's just that liberal judge was just elected in Wisconsin. It was a big deal. This is craziness. The Supreme Court, all of it is approved by the legislators. Precisely the thing that in Israel Netanyahu is trying to do, and it's presented as the end of democracy. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, to put all your eggs in that basket that is so full of broken eggs, and the basket is broken and the broken eggs are leaking, it seems weak to me. Same thing with the Republican Party. Trump has exposed something amazing. About a third of the American people are MAGA. And with all that applies to that, and they're not liberal Democrats. They're not. And that's just who they are. And it's kind of lucky for me that it's only a third. But the minute you have such a big proportion of people, it could be 51%. And that's why I challenge Allison. What do you do if it's 51%? Well, it's that don't want what you want a different system. Don't want Romania to be aligned with the West, maybe.
No, they don't know.
The Republican Party.
They're being emotional. I don't see Romanians loving violence. They're in their history.
No. I'm not predicting.
No.
I'm not predicting they will. But I'm saying if they consciously make that choice, and that's a challenge to us, and it reflects something of a given society or maybe of human nature. So the Republican Party now knows that a third of Americans are MAGA. That means 2/3 of the Republican base is MAGA. And that means the Republican Party is going to be a party where Mitt Romney's and John McCain's and Dick Cheney's even, and George Bush's, even both of them, are not going to be electable anymore, because in the primaries, the MAGAs have 2/3. And the MAGAs want something else from these people. The two-party system in America may be ripe for reorganization, because the idea of America does not have a two-party system. It has a two-party reality that only makes sense if you have two basic schools of thought in the political sphere. And if you do, then yeah, you got to have two parties, because if either one of these two splits into a third party, then they're going to lose every election because their vote is split. But that logic ceases to exist if the two-party system does not reflect the two schools of thought reality. And in America, we have three schools of thought. We have 1/3 that are MAGA. We have 1/6 roughly that are progressives. So they're not a majority of the Democratic half. And everyone else, which is half, is in the middle. And I think they could be a party. Like, I am a liberal Democrat. I have more in common with the conservative Republicans than I do with the progressives. I could be in a party with McCain. I couldn't be in a party with people that think that if you identify as a rabbit, you're a rabbit. I can't. So I think you're going to see political changes in America, and that may be the answer.
Anyone from the audience wishing to?
I have a quick question. Hi, Dan. Deborah Buckley here, and thanks for being here. And I read your Substack every day. I don't think I knew, but thank you.
Oh,
And
thank
so
you.
my question has to do with, since this session's about global politics and future and the new era, do you, amongst journalists in the world, have an opportunity to meet and talk and discuss how you're going to move forward in terms of getting out this such important information? I know that I worked heavily on the campaign for Kamala Harris. I too am a liberal Democrat, and people were over 38% of Americans didn't even vote. In Cleveland, where I live, which is a blue city but in a red state, I knocked on doors, I made phone calls, none of it helped. So even doing that type of a ground, effort wasn't working. So you said something earlier, Dan, about how journalism is going to be, and it is currently something that you have to pay for. And a lot of the people, for example, in the states who didn't vote are not those people who are going to pay for it. I'm a big public radio and TV person, and with Trump, that may be going away. So I just am wondering, in terms of your industry of journalism, and even the people in this room, and all of the people in this room, and on a greater scale, I mean, are you talking about these things in terms of how to reach the person who's not paying for the Atlantic or the financial, I think you see what my question is. So in terms of the future, how are we going to start to influence? You're always going to have the MAGA people. In my example, of course, is because I'm a U.S. citizen. But there are people, to your point earlier about independence. There are people who are one-issue voters. So, just in terms of how journalism can move in the direction to try and reach more people in a positive way, so that there isn't a negative opinion of journalists and the media, and we're not so divided into silos as we currently are.
Look,
That's a question, probably.
it's hugely complicated. When I said information needs to be expensive and that people should pay for news, I'm basically talking about how journalism can survive. The idea that it's all for free and somehow on top of the freeness, you make money some other way and people will still want to be journalists, I think cannot thrive. But I admitted from the get-go that a minority will pay, and that they're going to be increasingly ring-fenced from and at loggerheads with and disdainful of the majority that won't. And you bring up a great point that the result is going to be not just a breakdown of good karma in a democracy, but a total breakdown of democracy, because many of them are not even going to vote. These are big problems. I don't think you'll get me to say, well, therefore all journalism should be free, because that just won't work. But my own answer is basically Nick Thorpe. Public broadcasting. There needs to be a BBC. There needs to be a PBS. There needs to be an NPR. There needs to be Voice of America, even. That these thoughtless people are currently eviscerating. There needs to be excellent journalism that is free and that is not government run, but state funded. The challenge, of course, is what if a majority of people don't want it? What if they willfully want to leave the European Union or want to destroy Voice of America or want to be told lies? If that's their choice, then we're back to my original point about better education. Because you can't, at the end of the day, you can't impose any of this stuff on people. You can't make them vote. You can't make them pay for The Economist, and you can't make them watch PBS if they don't want to. But these discussions are happening in journalism, of course. I mean, when I was at AP, it was very internal, and the leadership of AP constantly discussing. We'd have annual strategic convocations in which it was discussed. I'm involved in all kinds of journalistic groups that discuss it. And by the way, LSE Ideas, Ratio Forum, look at this panel. People like Allison and Nick and John. I mean, such an honor to be part of it, and we're discussing it. So
Yeah.
whether all the discussing will lead to a solution is a different question. And my own advice, I guess, from back in my talk an hour and a half ago, is transparency. We have to be honest about what we're really saying and about the implications of it, and to not be afraid of philosophically uncomfortable position. As I took, leading by example, when I suggested that maybe a minority elite should be able to impose some rules on the majority just to keep things in check. Imposing liberal democracy, which in fact protects everyone from the government deciding that anyone named Ratio, a minority of people, should be arrested or worse. I think we kind of have to impose some sanity.
I think we should wrap up now. Conclude what has been a remarkable weekend. And the more remarkable, Dan, for your presence here, even viscerally? No. Remotely. Even remotely. It was good to have you here and to actually enrich what has been quite a rich period, a rich series of discussions, which I'll just briefly summarize before we finally break up. It's quite difficult to summarize because they were complex and they ranged very widely, much more widely, actually, in most cases, than the title of the session would have you believe. And the first two sessions, which were journalism in Romania, and then the second one, which broadened it out to journalism in in Central and Eastern Europe, really revealed in the people who spoke, including some who are still here and some who have gone, that there was a deep anxiety about, not just about liberal democracy and so forth, but about how we do journalism and how far journalism can actually still bear witness to the majority of people, not just to a minority of liberal Democrats, but to a majority of people who see in it, especially in the public broadcasting, as Dan has said, the public broadcasters, a way of understanding the world which is more or less true. That is, it's based on facts which have been checked and which make up a story which is, of course, incomplete, because no story is entirely, no truth can be, because it's so complex, can be given in its entirety, but at least it is a skeleton, a truthful skeleton, a skeleton based on facts, in which people can believe and agree is the case, and therefore becomes part of their life, of social, political, even economic life. People will, of course, see faults in it, will grumble about it, but that these pillars within journalism should remain seems to me to be necessary. And yet, what we're finding now, what we found in this series of arguments that we had, was a real sense that the world or the earth is shifting under journalism everywhere, not just in Romania or in the UK or Europe or America, but almost everywhere, and is ceding ground to people who are not interested in democracy or indeed the truth. And that was quite, I mean, must say, as chairing the sessions, it was quite shocking to hear that. It made you think quite deeply, and it will, I hope, make us all think deeply after this happens. But it's made me and I think others here think more deeply than in any previous of the RATU masterclasses. Before we were dealing often, as I think Dan, you said, with issues of technology. Basically, technology was changing, and we had to get used to using it, and so forth. And it brought up certain problems as well as certain advantages, but actually, journalism carried on. This time, it was not that. We didn't talk much about technology, except insofar as we talked about social media and so forth. So the thoughts that came up and the problems that came up and the disquiet that came up, I think, would deserve some thought over the next while for us journalists or would-be journalists, as many of you are. When we talked about disinformation and fake news, we came round to talking about, a lot of it was about the truth and how far the truth could be told and how far journalism was telling it, and how damaging disinformation and fake news was already being in this country, in Romania, but everywhere. And again, this stream of pessimism that came out, this sense that disinformation and fake news actually was more popular than anything one could see on BBC or indeed on television or read in newspapers or elsewhere. That the people who were most inclined against democracy, against journalism which attempted to tell the truth, they were now more powerful, or at least as powerful, or becoming powerful. And that was, I think, again, a revelation that people who had been in journalism all of their lives, my colleagues here, but others who were here, and some of whom are still here, were feeling the earth tremble underneath them. And I think we should come back to that, whether at the RATU Foundation or elsewhere. It's something which we should encourage other journalists to think about in whatever way they can. We had in war reporting, actually, was, in a way, it was an absolutely fascinating discussion, I thought. And the three war reporters who came were people who were at the top of their trade, and not just that, who had thought quite carefully about it, and had thought not just about how you do it and how dangerous it is and how you have to protect yourself, but actually thought about the morality of it. And Vadim, above all, was saying that he would take photographs, not the most horrific photographs, if what he was photographing could be seen by somebody who was a relative or a friend or a watchmate or whatever. That you had to be careful with that. You weren't just there to take the most shocking photograph, the most striking photograph. You were there to make a record of a war and the horror of war, but you had to approach it with a certain kind of, with a moral sense, that you weren't there to make things worse. You were there to make things clearer in that. And then coming to what we've what we've just been doing, it's been a continuation, I think, of speaking about global politics and a new era of journalism. It's the sense that things are changing, and the sense that we have to talk more and think more about how they're changing, and therefore how we change, or indeed not change, because we want the present situation to remain, has been extraordinarily valuable. And I think those of you who are, and many of you I think are either beginning in journalism or still relatively new to journalism, for this kind of discussion, it's worth a great deal, because it forces us to take some account of what we're doing. It's very easy in any situation, in any job, any profession, just to carry on, partly because you don't want to make a fuss, but also because day by day you do the job and you have another kind of life, and you don't think too much. What this weekend has done, certainly for me, and I think for us here and for others, is to make us think a bit more. And maybe we'll come back to that in this forum or in another. But I think it's been at times quite depressing, with quite a lot of pessimism around. But its great virtue has been that it's going to make us, or should make us, think more about what we're doing. So enough of that. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, John, very much for once again so ably orchestrating the sessions, which is the 5th time, and it has been an extraordinary couple of days. Thank you very much. So I'll give it another clap of applause for John. I'd also like to thank all the panelists we've had over these days, some of whom are still here, and we thank the ones who are already far gone away, and but who all contributed in most extraordinary ways. As John said, it was certainly given us enormous food for thought. Remembering that what Dan called the journalism being the voice for liberal democracy, and that's right. It's journalism, just as democracy. They mutually have to defend each other, and that's the challenge. So yes, we have heard some rather depressing thoughts about it all, and the dangers and the threats that journalism, free journalism, free press, etc., face. But also, I think on the plus side, we have heard quite a few suggestions, like, for instance, greater explanatory journalism, for instance, but positive thoughts, ideas, and suggestions as to how you all, as those who are young, budding journalists, future guardians of our democracy, as to help you, how to help you cope with the challenges. I want to thank, we should all thank the logistics department here at the Razziu Foundation, which is principally Pamela Razziu at the far end of the table. Ably abetted by her deputy, Deborah Buckley. and the team generally. They've got Alex over here, and the wielder of the microphone, and other details, and obviously the team who are not here, but all the ones who are feeding you and wining and dining you. And we still have a dinner to go, so don't run away yet. And thank you all for being here and participating. It's been a great couple of days.